My name is Patrick White, and I wanted to welcome you to beautiful Ice Glen. I'm sitting here with Jared Lockwood, with Bob Leverett, and with Ben Nickley, and we're going to have a discussion on the Glen. Before we get started, though, I wanted to thank the Town of Stockbridge and the Massachusetts Community Preservation Council for funding this project and making this film available to so many folks who might not otherwise be able to make it through the Glen. So I'm going to start with each of the three of you. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit about what you feel makes this place magnificent.
Sure. I'm Jared Lockwood. I'm a botanist and ecologist. I'm a member of the Native Tree Society and also a member of the Senior Measurement Advisory Group for the National Champion Tree Program, as well as a board member of Friends of Mohawk Trail State Forest.
Excellent. Bob.
Almost exactly what he said, except to take away the botanist ecologist part. Yeah, I'm I co-founded Friends of Mohawk Trail State Forest, the Senior Advisory Board, Measurement Board for the National Champion Tree Program, all those things.
But Bob, I want to hear a little bit more about really how the field of old growth forest evolved and your direct role in that initiative. Don't be modest, Bob. Come on.
How long do
let
we
me frame? Let me
here?
frame this. All right. This guy was on the cover of Smithsonian Magazine a couple of years back, sitting right here under a tree with Monica, his lovely partner, and talking about old growth forest. So, tell us a little bit about kind of how old growth forest emerged.
Well, I've always been a forest lover, and I grew up in the southern Appalachians, where I walked in the virgin forests, as we call them then, in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and in other places down there. I am also a U.S. Air Force veteran and had an Air Force career. I came to settle in Massachusetts as the vice president, then president of a management consulting firm, very far removed from the forest, but I always went to the forest. And I never really forgot what it looked like in its primeval state. And so when somewhere in the middle of the 1980s, I started hunting along with my son, Rob, what was not supposed to be here, little remnants of old growth that had somehow escaped the axe and saw from the earlier days, the middle of the 1800s, when most sources said, well, there is no old growth left in Massachusetts. And Rob and I were finding these little places, and we were saying, well, what is this? And that evolved into, well, I was a little careful about how I went presenting that information on who was I. I mean, here's this slow-talking southerner mountaineer that said, hey, you know what you're talking about, boy. And so I hooked up with scientists from Harvard Forest, from UMass, and from several other places, Mass Audubon, and lo and behold, we all came to the conclusion that we had these surviving areas of old growth, and it all unfolded. Pardon me?
You showed them and convinced them.
I showed them, I took them there, and I was a little careful. I said, well, what do you think this is? I believed it was old growth forest, but I didn't want to present myself as a know-it-all. So I went there and I sought their advice, and little by little, things took shape to include, we had conferences on old growth forests, starting out at the University of North Carolina, working our way eventually to University of Minnesota, all over. And it has been a great ride. It's not one that I planned.
All right, so hold that thought. Let's go to Ben. Ben, you founded 4 years ago the Berkshire Bird Observatory. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your path to getting here, getting to where you are, and tell us a little bit more about the observatory.
Yeah, happy to. So the path starts over there through Ice Glen. It's a privilege to be here sitting next to Bob. Thank you for inviting me, Patrick. I'm honored to be on this small panel here. And just talk about the forest of Ice Glen and up the slope. This is really a special place, and the first time I encountered it, I had no idea what I was in for. I like to explore trails. I like to hike. I like to be outside in the woods. I bird too when I have time. So I was in Stockbridge for some reason or another, and I'm like, oh, I want to get on a trail. There's a trail, right just past town. And I walked through Ice Glen. And as you all could imagine, I was astonished. The trees here, I mean, we keep looking up at this white pine behind the cameras, which you guys measured at, 160 feet?
63.25.
163.25 feet tall.
That's right.
Just giants, living like cathedral kind of things, right? Just amazing beings that have been here for centuries. And, it's compelling to spend some time in these places. They're dynamic landscapes. There's so much going on. And I have always been interested in nature, like Bob, but I got training scientifically. And so I have a couple of different lenses through which I can look at a forest. And places like this, I mean, they're just so rich. There's so many interactions and things going on, things to discover and appreciate and learn more about. You can never end, your learning in a place like this. So yeah, I walked up the trail, knew that I saw something special. And also on the slopes where those giant white ash trees are that Patrick, you worked so hard to protect those trees from invasive insect invasion. That's how I became familiar with this place. I serve on the board of Laurel Hill Association, and am very honored to be on that board because they protect some of the land upslope of here in the Sedgwick Reservation. It's great to be here. And Berkshire Bird Observatory is a small conservation nonprofit. We focus on collaborative projects to study wild bird populations, monitor them, and to protect them, and also to help connect people with nature through birds, which is a great gateway for a lot of people, especially when they can see a wild animal up close. It can really sort of start that connection, and then they'll go a little bit deeper. Maybe, because if you're a birder, you got to point out, where's the bird? Well, it's in that tree. Well, what tree? Oh, that beautiful 63.25 white pine. So you learn a little bit about the natural world, and it just grows from there.
And in fact, you mentioned Laurel Hill, and you mentioned the project of trying to save the ash and hemlock here, and I wanted to give some credit where credit's due. Laurel Hill Association was the first civic improvement organization in the country based here in Stockbridge. And in fact, it was a board member, Kate Fletcher, who when I first got elected to the select board had said to me, I'm really worried about woolly adelgid in my yard on some of my hemlocks. And I had heard about it being a southern thing. The first time I ever heard of woolly adelgid was an episode of The West Wing from 20 years ago, because it was down in Appalachia, down in southern Appalachia. And so, but nevertheless, I knew that we had a big hemlock forest here, and so I used her comment, the Laurel Hill board member's comment on woolly adelgid, and called Bob, and you brought in Ken Gooch and a forester whose name escapes me now. Back when we first walked the forest, there were three of us, three plus me. Anyway, whatever. You guys outlined a plan in 2021 for us to really try to fast track saving the ash and hemlock, and from my understanding, it's gone exceptionally well. Ken was here earlier and spoke to that. So first of all, thanks for the advice, Bob, and I want to just say that Stockbridge has been very supportive of efforts to save the forest here, and to preserve larger stands. I know you've done measurements at the Sedgwick Reservation, at Bullard Woods, here at Ice Glen. Why don't you talk a little bit about, what makes some of these Stockbridge forests exceptional from a scientific point of view?
Well, as someone who's interested in measuring trees, particularly the largest trees that we have, Ice Glen is a great place. Like we've said, there's this fantastic, towering, massive eastern white pine. There are also large hemlocks throughout the ravine, and even on the other side there are some significant ash trees that Ben mentioned earlier. So from the perspective of someone interested in finding and documenting, accurately measuring big trees, Ice Glen is a great place. But there's really a lot more than just big trees here. I mean, in the ravine, the trees are not especially large, but the environment is just so complex. And I think that's something that people rarely experience in this part of the world. So much of the natural environment has been heavily disturbed through human activity. And this is one small refuge that's really been spared a large part of that.
But Bob, you also had some specific measurement scales that referred to municipal forests, and you had indicated to me that Stockbridge was right up there with other, in terms of leading municipalities in the state of Massachusetts around some of these forest measurements.
Yes, Jared and I and other members of the Native Tree Society and our affiliation with the National Champion Tree Program, we're really obsessed with accuracy. It isn't, I'm an engineer by background, so if something is present, I'll try to measure it one way or another, sooner or later. At any rate, we go to great lengths to get very precise measurements and to document places that are special, and Ice Glen happens to be one of them. So one of the things that we will do, for example, is we will compute an index sort of overall forest height. And what we do is we find the tallest individual tree of the 10 tallest species, and we average those 10 heights, and we come up with something we call a Rucker index. Well, this one is right up there, just under Mohawk Trail State Forest, as the second highest well, I think it's probably the third highest now, but right there in the top group by this measurement. Well, Stockbridge being a municipality, that was totally unexpected. You usually expect that to be out in a state forest or on a large nature preserve, and here it was, right here.
Excellent. So we're seeing obviously global challenges around climate, around preservation, around kind of maintaining things. Ben, what do you see as sort of like some of the you deal with a lot of migratory birds. You deal with, obviously, in fact, most birds are migratory, aren't they? I mean, many that we talked about earlier.
In our region, certainly, yeah.
And the trends are clearly not good. How can places like this serve as a refuge, for bird populations and just nature in general?
Sure.
Is it the contiguous with other forest stands, or are they also effective as standalone locations?
Yeah. So I'll just start with one bird species. The winter wren. So winter wrens are sort of at their range limit here for the breeding season anyway, during the summer. Most of them are north of us in the boreal forest. That's where their core sort of population is, if you will. Winter wrens are birds that run around on the ground like little mice, and they love big, dead, downed trees, big mossy trees, mossy rocks, things like that. And Ice Glen is just full of that because the forest has had time to mature. Trees here have had enough time, centuries, to just die of natural causes and fall down in the jumbled rocks in the ravine. And that has created habitat for this species. I mentioned the range limit of winter wren. Well, because it's a more northern bird, it's used to a more northern forest type, which includes tree species like eastern hemlock. And that's what we have here in Ice Glen, because Ice Glen has its own sort of unique microclimate that is good for those trees. Yeah. And those trees contribute to the microclimate because they keep everything nice and shaded and cool. And so what we have here at Ice Glen is a sort of climate refuge, actually, for winter wren, a more northern species, and a whole host of other species like Blackburnian warbler, black-throated green warbler, blue-headed vireo, hermit thrush, red-breasted nuthatch. So these birds as breeders, and these are migratory birds, by the way. So in the summer, most of them are further north of us, but because we have a place like this, they're able to actually breed successfully here. Dark-eyed junco, that's another one. I just heard it singing, which is a snowbird for most people. They come down in the winter. But small pockets of special places can
Cool
support
enough.
can support those
Right.
birds. And so these are specific species I want to sort of highlight because they showcase the importance of this unique place. But also, old forest is special in terms of the dynamics and what's going on. So there are different things going on in this forest than you would have in a forest that the average tree age is something like 50, 60 years or whatever. And most of our forests in Massachusetts, as Bob was talking about, I mean, they've been cut over time and time again. And it wasn't until Bob went around and found these small pockets that escaped the saw and the axe, as you put it, that we actually have a chance to identify them and protect them. Because there's a lot of interesting things going on here. And maybe Bob and Jared, you'd like to talk about some of that, but like the deadwood ecology, plant succession when it's had hundreds of years to go through that naturally, natural disturbances, opening up small gaps in the canopy instead of, big clear cut kind of disturbances. I mean, all of that goes into the ecology of the place and the dynamics. So really cool, fascinating place.
So, is there an opportunity? I want to just put on my municipal hat for a minute. You have sort of a really global trend around pocket forests, urban pocket forests, rural pocket forests, but really kind of in municipal centers. Do you see an opportunity for proactive approach by municipalities around encouraging spaces like this for their kind of populated centers?
I think that municipalities, particularly in Massachusetts, have an opportunity to take on a leadership role in explaining to the public as a whole what the value of having these pocket forests are, and as teaching, but as biodiversity, all the reasons that we value them. It's not easy to have that municipal versus raw nature, even on a small scale, that association, in many states, that would be very hard to do. Massachusetts is really right up there near the top, in my opinion, and Stockbridge, number one.
Yeah, so I love this question, Patrick. I think one of the reasons that Ice Glen is so special is its immediate proximity to downtown Stockbridge. I mean, that is awesome. I mean, even just today filming this, we saw many people coming through the trail, right? And some of those folks were telling me their experiences of this place, that they thought they were in a cathedral. That is the words of the woman that went down the trail. And so, this is obviously an exceptional pocket forest, if you like that term. But even green spaces that aren't old growth, but are natural to some extent and have a variety of plant and animal species in our functioning ecosystem, having those areas next to population centers, I mean, that's crucial. I think about city parks with natural sort of components and how important that is, because people only protect what they know and what they care about. And you're not going to know a place like this if it's out in the middle of Mohawk State Forest, Like we go out into those places. We're ecologists, right? But maybe, your kid that grew up in Pittsfield or New York City or whatever, so access to nature is how you're going to get people to appreciate it and to get the benefits, because walking through a place like this has a whole host of benefits. And so it's really special and important.
So I got a question for you. You got on our little panel here. We got two old guys. Bob, you're now in your 80s, right? I'm in my 60s. You guys represent the next generation. In fact, Jared, you've had a great opportunity to work directly with Bob for a number of years, sort of kind of the heir apparent, if you want, to some of the work, as we look over the next decades and what may come in the future. What advice do you have for young people who, let's face it, it's hard to be an ecologist, a botanist, a scientist, even a scientist today. It's hard to be somebody who cares about ecology and makes a career out of it. How did you get to where you guys are? And how do you see, what advice can you give to young people who kind of love and can find a passion for doing the sort of work that you're doing? And
Yeah, well, my academic background, I first got my bachelor's degree in plant biology or botany, and then I got my master's degree in evolution, ecology, and systematics. And it was really kind of an accident that I got into this in a way. I mean, I had this background in biology, but it was really after my father's passing that I ended up spending a lot more time in the woods just for therapeutic reasons. And I found out just really by chance that there was this online group called the Native Tree Society, and they were all about measuring trees. And just the idea of measuring a tree, I had no idea how you even do that. So just out of curiosity, I looked more into the Native Tree Society, and I found out that its founder happened to live here in Massachusetts. And we made contact on the website. He invited me out to Mohawk Trail State Forest, and in a way the rest is history. But in retrospect, where I am now just kind of, it seems like it fell into my lap in a way. But
it sounds like you found your passion, and Bob provides a mentoring opportunity.
I found a passion.
It's a real partnership.
And I found a mentor who could help cultivate that.
I love that story because you kind of just went with it and something developed. And I think in our sort of fields, natural sciences, ecology, conservation, you have to have the passion, right? You have to deeply care and find your passion, and you can find different passions. And then, you kind of see where that takes you, and reaching out to people, making connections, that's really important. But I think just being authentic and pursuing what interests you is the number one piece of advice that I would give to anyone. And if you're doing that, things kind of tend to work out, I think.
And let's face it, our lives all go better when we love what we do. I mean, and so many people are not blessed to have a career that they love. And I think it's just really exciting that, it's so rewarding to be in a place like that, and to have actually your work bring you to a place like this, I think is just incredible. So when you talk about tree measurement, it's not just about bragging rights for a municipality or a park or a state forest. There's actually bona fide science around climate, around things like carbon sequestration and other factors that can help mitigate, human impacts on our world. And I just literally stated everything I know about this topic, and so I want to now go to the experts and have you fill in the blanks.
Well, let me say, first of all, as an engineer, I'm predisposed to want to measure things, and it's not for sport, although I am involved in that. It is generally for some purpose, at least I think, is a higher level, and scientific research is certainly a strong one in that. But once I'm into it all the way. As a consequence, I started finding out back in maybe about 2000, maybe 10 or 12, that there was a reason to go beyond what I was measuring in terms of tree dimensions, height, average crown spread, circumference, etc., and take it to the whole volume of the tree, which meant the volume of the trunk, it could mean the volume of the limbs, etc., and express that in terms of carbon held by that form. And there I found that what was out there to do that was all over the map. And taking my mathematical chops, I started looking into perfecting ways of measuring trees in our forests ever more accurately. That took on a life of its own. Once I started putting that out there, then of course I had a lot of people who weren't measuring trees very accurately, but they didn't know that they weren't measuring trees very accurately. And I will say I never lost an argument. That's something I will state right off. Because what I was doing was I was taking the best equipment we had, I was taking mathematical techniques that work for shapes that are not absolutely perfectly round or whatever, or I wasn't making assumptions about the forms of these trees, and myself, and I started working with other people. Jared is very much a part of that now, and we're taking this whole field of measuring trees and then getting results out of it that's useful to science as far as we can possibly take it. Well, Ice Glen figured into that very strongly because a lot of people can measure simple forms. So if you get a forest that really isn't a forest, it's a plantation, and all the trees are basically carbon copies of all the others, and they're all perfectly straight and well behaved, a lot of people can measure that kind of woodland and whatnot very well. Come here and look at that baby. That's not so easy. That doesn't fall into any niche. So we have developed the methods to do that. And then we translate that into products that are useful to the Department of Conservation and Recreation, to the environmental conservation associations, et cetera, the public as a whole. And a lot of the stuff that we've been doing now is really being used by the climate scientists to figure out, well, okay, what is the value of one of these older, complicated forests to holding carbon, but not only holding carbon, gaining more carbon. And there was a lot of misinformation on that. Well, we're setting them straight.
And frankly, most of Massachusetts was clear cut in the 19th century, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And so what we're seeing is what they call first generation, is that right? Or second generation forests that have come up in that clear cut space. Ice Glen is obviously old growth, so it wasn't clear cut, but that's only 40 acres here. You know, what advice do you have for state leaders, federal leaders if they're listening, for local leaders, for private landowners on how to steward these types of spaces over the next century, even over the next decade or two? You know, for those of us who have been tasked with stewarding these forests, what are some practical pointers you could give to us who don't come with the kind of experience that you guys have?
My advice to landowners, municipality, whoever they are, private or public, in terms of the roles of their forests, is to know what each of your tree species can contribute. Know basically the growth history of individual species and as the forest as a whole. That's not simple. It takes a lot of research, and along the way they're going to get a lot of misinformation. One of our roles these days is to try to correct the record. A forest like Ice Glen is a huge, huge sink of carbon, but it isn't just dormant. It's not just static. It's not senescent. It's not the equivalent of an old tree senior citizen home. These trees are still continuing to grow, as Jared will attest, as will I, this huge Ice Glen white pine. It's got somewhere around 1,000 cubic feet of trunk volume. You can add another 10 to 15% in its limbs. But that's not just frozen in time, it's continuing to grow. So one of the things that we would want people to understand is what their forests can achieve, what they have achieved to a certain point in time, but what's left for them to achieve going forward. That's where we try to help them out.
But I want to ask you guys a really a practical question. We are blessed in Stockbridge to have a great Agriculture and Forestry Commission and a great Conservation Commission. But we're a rural town, and frankly, many rural towns, they may have some citizen scientists, but don't have the breadth and depth of experience that either folks like you would have or that folks at the state or federal would have as scientists. And I guess the question I have for you is, you know, for boards of citizens who are tasked with managing spaces in their small, you know, a lot of the most important forests in Massachusetts are in the most rural places. How do what practical advice can you offer to them about, you know, that doesn't involve, you know, a tremendous amount of investment of time that they may not have in how to protect these spaces? Any of you? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to kind of know what you have in terms of your on the landscape, what forest type you have, how approximate age, that kind of thing, complexity, land use history. Some of that you can tell by walking through the woods with someone with some experience. You know, you're not going to get the kind of high quality data you'd get going out with Bob necessarily, and all the measurements, but you don't need all of that. And then, I mean, just protect forests. You know, like come on, you know, that's really important. We're in an era of human-induced rapid climate change. Forests sequester carbon. That's what they do. And so they're very important. And of course, it's not just about carbon capture, carbon storage, and climate. I mean, forests are refuges for a whole host of plant and animal species. You know, I study migratory birds. Well, I mean, our migratory birds are here because of our forests, you know, and the insects that they harbor, like you know, all the Lepidoptera, the caterpillars that these migratory birds depend on, and it's all part of an interconnected system. We depend on the forest too, and not just for the wood products for our homes, but for the air that we breathe, for the water that comes down through precipitation. I mean, forests are vital. So I think if there's a chance to protect forests, especially older forests, because you talked about the cutover, right? Massachusetts, been many areas, most in Massachusetts have been clear cut multiple times in their history. You know, post-colonial, you know, cut and cut again. So when you have forests that are old, those are highly valued and important. Those are really, really important. Old growth, absolutely. Ice Glen is special. But even forests that are starting to develop that old growth characteristic, you know, like approaching 100 years. Well, you know, old growth is so rare. If we keep cutting forests before they ever achieve, you know, 150, 200 years, like, you know, you're not going to get more of it. You're not going to get it back. So
let me go beyond what Ben is saying, and if we address the people in the rural towns and whatnot, where do they get the information to know that their forests are valuable and which ones and that sort of thing?
Hopefully they're all going to watch this video, right?
That is the continuing challenge that we have. We try to do it through the main conservation organizations. We do films like the film that Monica and I are putting together, and Jared's a part of, etc. And Colin is actually doing. We try to do that. We try to do that, and we're stumbling, but we're trying, because we're always constantly battling misinformation that is there because somebody has a specialized interest in that woodland and they're going to make money off of it in the short term. That's a story as old as human. It's a human story about that. All we can do is everything that we can do, and that's what we're trying to do.
Are there specific, species or age ranges that might be more important to prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of goes without saying that any natural space is worth protecting. But when we're talking about our forests here, I think, as Ben was saying, older, not yet old growth, but maturing forests, I don't think are receiving the credit that they deserve in terms of their ability to sequester carbon. Bob's work on tree growth rates over their lifespans has really highlighted the fact that when a tree is at its youngest, when it's a seedling, a sapling, its growth, I mean, you can track it from year to year. You know, last year it was this tall, and this year it's this tall, and it's leafier and just bushier. But that doesn't, that's kind of fluff. When you get down to the stem itself, it hasn't really grown a whole lot. Whereas you look at these bigger, older trees, and because they have these big crowns and all that photosynthetic area, they can really gather a lot more carbon than those smaller trees can. So I would say prioritize older forests.
I was talking with Shannon Halsey, the president of the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohicans last year, it was in the context of a speech he gave, and they recently acquired through a grant from the state of Massachusetts, a partial grant from the state of Massachusetts, a very large tract, over 300 acres of Monument Mountain, the northern side of Monument Mountain. And when asked what her plan was to manage that forest, she said, we plan to leave it alone for 200 years and see what happens. And I thought that was really, and you look at a place, one of the rare places in Massachusetts that is exactly like it was back when Mohicans roamed these pathways, rather than those of us now who do it. And I thought it was quite an interesting take on land management, coming from the wisdom of our local tribe's indigenous leader. I would also just point out that at the entrance to Ice Glen over on Park Street, there's a sign, and on that sign it has the word Watatanik, which is the word that the tribe gave us, which refers to what they used to call the Berkshires before it was called the Berkshires. So for millennia, this was known as Watatanik, which means land beyond the mountains. And I would just encourage you to show some respect and just learn and understand each other. And I think with that, any other final thoughts that you all want to share? Or thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today in Stockbridge. And thanks once again to the Town of Stockbridge and the Massachusetts Community Preservation Council for funding this effort.